Hi, and thank you for joining me. Hello. I'm going to take off the starter motor, or at least attempt to take off the starter motor. This is the starter motor just here on the engine. I've been having problems over the last few years. Occasionally when you turn the ignition key you get a click and then the starter motor just kind of throws out the shaft or pinion, touches the flywheel, but the starter motor doesn't rotate or go round to turn the engine over. And that happened occasionally, but over time it's happening more frequently. So I'm going to attempt to take off the starter motor now. You can just see here where the starter motor shaft comes out and rotates on the flywheel. The starter motor is 24 volts on this engine, so two 12-volt batteries connected together to make 24 volts. And down here you can see that it's held on by two straps. There's a strap here, and then there is another strap just here. So two straps, two straps that hold on the starter motor, and down here you can see there's some bolts to undo to loosen those clamps. So the 24 volt connections are just here down underneath the starter motor. So I'll take those off after isolating the battery from the starter motor, and then undo these clamp bolts and hopefully be able to pull the starter motor off the engine. I suspect it'll be fairly heavy because it's quite a big lump, but here goes. This is one of my sets of Whitworth spanners. I tried those on the bolts holding the 24 volt electrical connections to the starter motor, and none of those were the right size. I had an adjustable wrench to hand, but that would not go on the nuts without the removal of the strap on the starter motor just above the electrical connections. So I decided to first of all undo and loosen the strap just above the electrical connections to the starter motor first of all, and then proceeded to remove the electrical connection bolts with a wrench. So that's the nut and spacer bar that I've just taken off, and hopefully this clamp will just pull up. I'm having to do this one first because actually I'm having difficulty trying to get to the electrical connections with this in place. Right, so that's that bar lifted out of the way, and then there's a bar just down here, which is almost short-circuiting the... That's not good. Danger of short-circuiting across the two terminals down there. This bar is. So I think I better tie that up out of the way so I don't risk shorting between positive and negative, although I have isolated the batteries, but the isolator's just I've just turned the positive connection. Perhaps it would have been a good idea to take off the positive and negative connections at the starter batteries. Well, on the negative connection I'm actually using a multi-adjustable spanner because I've tried the 5/16 spanner and that's just too big. So I'm trying this and it is turning. That's the negative connection off. There's the heavy duty cable from the battery and one from the ignition thinner cable. I've just put a tie clip through them so that I know that those two go together when it comes back to reassembly. Just a closer view now of the positive and negative connection to the starter motor, and also another connection from the ignition in the middle. Well, I've discovered the size of spanner that fits the nuts holding on the cables to the starter motor, the electrical cables. It's actually a 9/16 spanner, which I think is AF size. And now I've taken the electrical cables off, I can take off this Heath Robinson sticky tape here, the yellow insulation tape that was holding the bar here off hitting the two starter motor connections there. I didn't want to find that somehow there was a short I wasn't aware of and it created a big spark. But I think I'm just about ready to try removing the starter motor. I just hope it clears the diesel fuel input to the AML lift pump here. That's the return. That cable there is the return back to the fuel tank. So let's hope it does. These brackets lift up here, but not a lot. There is a pin at the back holding them in place. If one drives it forward, one might be able to get it out, hopefully. Anyway, I'll leave it in place and hope I can drop the starter motor down and out. That's my plan anyway, so I'm going to go for it now. Just a closer look of the space of the silver coloured ring between the starter motor and the engine frame itself. Well, I've got the starter motor out and here it is. Bit of a job. I forgot to turn the camera on actually, but it was a bit of a job. I kind of undid the other bracket here. This one goes through the fitting there and supports the starter motor there, and that dropped away. Managed to pull the starter motor backwards and then tilt it downwards and it's come away, and here it is on the floor. It's a big job and it weighs a lot, an awful lot. I suppose I can give the engine a bit of a wipe round where it's all greasy down here. Whew. Heavy. As the Gardner, which is the silver coloured object above the starter motor, tends to leak a little bit of oil, and it is a bit oily down there round the starter motor. That's the spacer again that sits between the starter motor and the engine frame itself. I did notice that there is a small crack in it, which I've asked the person refurbishing the starter motor to have a look at. So, with the starter motor in a better location to have a look at what's going off inside it, the back cover is held on by 2 bolts which are just in the view now. I was very, very surprised with the amount of carbon dust that was revealed inside the electrical part of the starter motor when you take the cover off. Basically, the carbon dust seems to be all over the place. I removed it from the metal cover itself, and I just turned the starter motor over to tap some of the dust away as well before I took the starter motor for refurbishment. An awful lot of carbon dust there. The engine, I believe, was rebuilt in about 20 years ago, and since that time the starter motor has not been off the engine. There is an Irish Gardner engineering firm run by Joe McCool, who has several videos on YouTube about the CAV starter motor of various sizes. I think he mentions a 5-inch and a 6-inch. I believe this is a 6-inch starter motor. Looking at it, you can see parts that say Lucas and also a symbol that looks like a Mercedes symbol. I mentioned this to the person rebuilding the starter motor, and he said that since CAV ceased trading, that was the manufacturer of the starter motor, they were also owned by Lucas and Preston. The gentleman doing the refurbishment was not surprised at the amount of carbon build-up and said the starter motor had been overheating. So, a couple of weeks later, I went back to collect the now refurbished starter motor. This is a 5-inch starter motor, and quite a few new parts had to be fitted as part of the refurbishment. You may have noticed as well that the starter motor is now painted grey. I'm just taking the back off there to show you the inside of the refurbished starter motor with its new parts. On collecting the starter motor, I was able to see it running and in use. I now need to take the starter motor back to the narrowboat and refit it to the Gardner 4LK engine. I do hope you found this video of interest. Thank you so much for watching. So now that it has been refurbished, hopefully the starter motor will start the Gardner 4LK engine for many years to come. Thank you for watching again. Cheerio.